Let's see if this works. Hello, everybody. Can you hear me fine? Hi there. We're going to get started here. And I'd just like to say, first of all, thank you, everybody, for coming out to our second event of February, Black History Month. Very, very grateful to be partnering with the History Department on this one, and I made sure to wear my very official CSB SJU history hoodie. So if you want one of these, I'm sure you can get in contact with the right people in the History Department. And without further ado, I'd like to introduce Dr. Brittany Merritt Nash, who's been with the department for 6 years now and has recently started teaching a course in the honors program called Community Histories. In this course, students are mostly developing a project related to a different group of people on campus or a touch point in our campus's history. So I thought Brittany would be the perfect person to partner with on this kind of event to talk about a local history to us. And yeah, she's going to help us learn a little bit about the history of race and racism as it has existed at St. Ben's and St. John's. So please join me in welcoming Brittany Merritt Nash.
Yes, thank you, Owen. Thank you, Sam, for the introduction, and thanks to all of you for being here tonight. As Sam said, I teach a class about campus histories. I'm not going to talk about the entire history of racism and race at St. Ben's, St. John's tonight. That would take many, many hours and days. But instead, I'm just going to talk about some snapshots or highlights from our campus histories to kind of make some connections. Race and racism are central features of American history and American life. And our campuses haven't been and are not immune from this reality. We can see this from the very beginning of our campus histories. As our land acknowledgement states, these schools were built on native land. And the monasteries operated boarding schools for indigenous people based around ideas of racial hierarchy and white supremacy and cultural assimilation. There's a lot to cover in our campus histories, but I'm just going to talk about a few topics for about 15 minutes and highlight 4 stories from our campus archives. I'm going to start in 1938, when the first 2 black women were admitted to the College of St. Benedict. To give you the broader national context of what was going on in the 1930s, the U.S. was in the midst of the Great Depression, and black Americans experienced twice the unemployment rate as white Americans. There was a resurgence of lynchings in the segregated Jim Crow South, and widespread racial discrimination in New Deal housing and unemployment projects. It was in this context that Kathleen Yanes and Gertrude Donoval came to the College of St. Benedict as the first black women to attend the college. When Kathleen and Gertrude came to St. Ben's, the St. Paul chapter of the St. Ben's Alumni Association wrote to the dean of the college, Sister Claire Lynch. In their letter from September 1938, they warned that admitting black students to St. Ben's would, quote, cause a great harm to the prestige of the college. The decision to send the letter and voice these concerns, they said, was unanimous. Sister Claire responded by defending the college's decision to admit Kathleen and Gertrude. The stance of the Catholic Church, she said, was, quote, to condemn racial discrimination as unjust, immoral, and unchristian. Furthermore, she argued, our status, quote, as a Catholic college will be but improved by an act which is, after all, only outward evidence of our belief in Christian, not to say Catholic, principles. She also noted that prestigious schools like Harvard and Yale were accepting black students. However, Sister Claire also stepped carefully in explaining the college's stance and worked to appease the alumni's concerns. She praised the alums for, quote, their fealty and devotion to St. Ben's and their worries for the college. She told them that Kathleen and Gertrude were, quote, refined, cultivated, and intelligent, and that the college had rejected others that they deemed, quote, undesirable. Importantly, Sister Claire assured the alums that the boundaries of the St. Ben's community would be carefully guarded and not open to all. She wrote that the college had, quote, no intention of throwing open our doors and allowing other races to enter indiscriminately. Only a small number of students of color, she assured them, will, quote, be qualified economically, intellectually, and socially to attend college. So, she said, there would never be enough to, quote, change appreciably the atmosphere of our college. While Sister Claire took a strong stance defending the college's decision, her response catered to the white fragility and racism of the alums. We can see that from the earliest days of attempts to increase diversity on campus, there was a tension between the Catholic and Benedictine values of justice, community living, and respect for persons on the one hand, and concerns about who should be welcomed into that community on the other. We're going to fast forward now to 1970, when a group of Black students occupied the president's office at St. John's. To give you the broader national context, in the 1960s was the Civil Rights Movement, legal desegregation, the Vietnam War, widespread protests, the assassination of civil rights leaders like Martin Luther King Jr., the Black Power movement, and unprecedented student activism on college campuses. It was in this post-civil rights context that St. John's and St. Ben's, along with other predominantly white institutions around the country, began actively recruiting more international students and students of color to diversify their campuses. While the school successfully recruited students of color in larger numbers than ever before, the schools were still historically and predominantly white. Black students who arrived on the two campuses in the late 1960s found that the campus's cultures and curricula and activities reflected the interests and values of the white majority. Students formed Black organizations for the first time, such as the OAAS, or the Organization of Afro-Affiliated Students, where both Black Americans and Black international students created community and hosted Black musicians, speakers, and events on campus. However, few white students attended their events. Despite being very visible on campus, Black students felt invisible. Frustrated with the institution's bureaucracies and the slow pace of change, they decided to approach St. John's President Coleman Barry with their demands, a proposition concerning Black survival. Black students wanted to see themselves reflected in the culture and values of the institutions. Charles Harvey, who was a participant in the sit-in, said, and I quote, "We wanted to show that we really want to survive. We were only talking about surviving." Black students asked for funding to promote culture and unity among people of African descent on campus. Black students asked to be taught, advised, and mentored by Black professors, and to study Black writers and playwrights. They asked to learn history and sociology from Black perspectives, to learn about Africa, and to learn African languages. In short, Black students wished to feel part of, and not apart from, their campus's cultures. They wanted to feel less lonely, and they wanted to feel welcomed. However, institutional leaders responded to the demands by dismissing the students' concerns. One member of the St. John's Administrative Council suggested that the students' demands were not valid and the product of a student who had, quote, "a highly emotional mental state." In response to administrative inaction, on the afternoon of November 16, 1970, approximately 25 Black students from St. Ben's and St. John's began a 3-hour occupation of the St. John's president's office. After failing to persuade the students to exit the office, university administrators obtained a court injunction and called the Stearns County Sheriff to order the students to leave. All but 9 students left, and the sheriff deputies removed and arrested the remaining students, 5 from St. John's and 4 from St. Ben's. In the years after the sit-in, administrators initiated various programs and hired a Black faculty member. But little changed for Black students, who continued to care for each other in student-led organizations like the Black Student Union. Let's fast forward again to the 1990s, when a bar fight at Sal's led to protests and demonstrations on campus. To give you the broader national context, the early 1990s saw frustrations over the rollback of civil rights era protections and programs, increasing incarceration rates that disproportionately affected Black men, and police brutality. In this context emerged a video of LAPD officers violently beating a Black man, Rodney King, sparking protests and riots in 1992 after the officers were acquitted on charges of using excessive force. At St. John's and St. Ben's, the schools had recently won a grant to implement multiculturalism on campus. However, many of the problems faced by minoritized students in the 60s and 70s remained. On October 9th, 1993, tensions came to a head when two white SJU students physically confronted a black SJU student as he left Sal's and made racially offensive comments to him. The confrontation escalated, and when one of the white students hit the black student, 2 bar fights ensued. The incident sparked several speakouts and protests on campus, as St. Ben's and St. John's students connected what happened at Sal's to unaddressed issues with racism both on and off campus. Students of color described being targeted by police, facing discrimination in St. Joe, hearing racial slurs from other students, feeling isolated and tokenized, and experiencing burnout from their efforts to create change in the community. They also allied themselves with LGBTQ+ and disabled students to showcase multiple experiences of exclusion. Like in 1970, students circulated a list of demands, asking for a more inclusive curriculum, greater diversity amongst faculty and staff, and policies against racist acts. Like in 1970, students asked to feel welcomed in their community. The issue was debated in the record, with students and faculty sharing examples of racism and tokenism, while other students objected to the tactics of the protesters and denied the existence of racism on campus. The student protests and speakouts caused some administrators and student organizations to listen and to press for changes. Admissions Director Roger Young wrote to the St. John's president, Dietrich Reinhardt, and warned him, quote, "We stand to lose most of our black students because they are sick and tired of fighting the system, which in their words, doesn't seem to want to change or to care very much." The director of the new Cultural Enrichment Office, Jose Bourget, urged the presidents to adopt, quote, "a policy of zero tolerance for racist behavior." The SJU Senate wrote letters to administrators, urging them to invoke severe sanctions for the students who instigated the fight and provide more support for staff members who advise international and minoritized students. They stated, quote, that racism is not just a problem from the minority members of the community, but rather it affects the education and well-being of each and every student, administrator, faculty member, and staff person on our campus, regardless of race. Unlike in 1970, there were more voices asking for change. Let's fast forward a final time to some more recent protests in 2014 and 2017. What was happening in the national context here? We have the final years of Barack Obama's presidency, increased attention to police violence against Black Americans, the advent of the Black Lives Matter movement, the 2016 presidential race between Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton, and heated debates over immigration and border walls. On campus in 2014, seniors were in the midst of 40 days of parties, what was called that year FAMSAC, or 14th Annual Mandatory Senior Appreciation Keggers. One of the FAMSAC parties, which took place on Cinco de Mayo, was themed around the border between Mexico and the US. According to local news reports, students at the party dressed in sombreros and held chihuahuas. When photos from the party circulated, speak-out events and protests once again occurred on campus. Students of color spoke about cultural appropriation and connected the theme of the party to problems they experienced on campus with racialized comments and microaggressions. Like in 1970 and in 1993, students expressed feelings that they were unwelcome at St. Ben's and St. John's, and they wished to experience the Benedictine Valley of community that they had been promised. Like in 1993, this protest was debated on campus, as some believed that students who were upset should, quote, get over it. 3 years later, in 2017, an incident on the Link bus triggered more protests and speakouts. In February, a video circulated online of St. John's students shouting, "Build that wall," to a Latino student on a late Saturday night ride on the Link. In response, students protested on both campuses, expressing outrage at the video and once again sharing their own stories of racism and exclusion. During listening sessions organized by the presidents, students shared that the chant was dehumanizing and made them feel like they did not belong to the Johnny Benny community. Students also connected the Link incident to previous ones, arguing that nothing had been done. Senior St. Ben's student Kanea Andrews remembered the FAMSAC protest during her first year. As she told the Record, quote, "Again, another protest. The students are asking for the same thing." Like in previous protests, students presented demands to the administration. They requested accountability for hate speech, a new and more inclusive curriculum, and more funding for offices and groups serving minoritized students on campus. The goals of the demands, they said, were to create a truly inclusive community that lived up to the Benedictine values professed by the institutions. Also, like in previous protests, students who demanded change received pushback from others who argued that the Link chant was a matter of free speech, not of hate speech. Students who protested in 2014 and 2017 made similar arguments and shared similar experiences to the students who protested in 1970 and in 1993. And they dealt with similar disconnects that we saw in Sister Claire's letter to alumni in 1938, between the expression of Benedictine values on the one hand and tensions surrounding who belongs to this community on the other. It's important to keep in mind that the stories I share tonight are just snapshots of a much larger history. We've only scratched the surface of this topic, and there are so many other stories to be told, both in the past and in the present. We also know that these issues continue to affect student experiences at St. Ben's and St. John's today, as you can see in the 2020 call to action created by the St. Ben's and St. John's Student Senates, who held listening sessions with students and faculty to discuss the problem of racism on campus and identify action steps. So what can be done? Dr. King famously said that the arc of the moral universe is long and bends towards justice. But it's important to keep in mind that the arc doesn't bend by itself. It requires human hands. And indeed, students on our campuses have been able to create change. It was students who convinced the administration 3 years ago to no longer have classes on MLK Day. Students who pressed for more inclusive spaces on campus now have the Multicultural Center and the Lavender Lounge. And students who asked for structural change have a senior diversity officer in the administration for the first time. But much work remains. During the height of the civil rights movement, James Baldwin wrote that the power of history is that we carry it within us. It is literally present in all that we do. It's where we get our identities, our frames of reference, and our aspirations. We live in a reality that the past created, and that past has to be confronted honestly and bravely to create a better future. Thank you.
Hey, everybody, I'm back here now, sorry. I just wanted to say, again, thank you to Dr. Brittany, Merritt, Nash, and we have a microphone here and an opportunity for a few minutes if people have any questions or questions about, things that we touched on in the presentation, or just questions for Dr. Merritt Nash, as she's been, pretty involved in reviewing different pieces from the archives. So it's an open, opportunity to ask questions, but, don't feel pressured to do so either.
Brittany, thanks so much for pulling all those pieces of that history together. I feel like I've heard pieces and been here on campus and lived through a lot of them, so I just love them coming together. And something I tell my students, one of their accomplishments from the protests and students speaking out, so I want to either have you correct me or invite you to add this to your list of things. I say our CI in our CS classes, both as part of the integrations curriculum. They really happen because of those students' protests and student demands. And so whenever I teach those classes, I tell students the reason that you have this class is because students on our campuses over a number of years have spoken up and have protested and have said that we need to do this. And I think that's just important for students here to know, right? Because I think a lot of times it's incredibly frustrating because you feel like nothing happens and nothing changes. And, that's one thing about being at Benedictine institutions, and maybe just higher ed and institutions generally, it takes a long time for change to happen, but that is a really concrete change that I think is going to have, fingers crossed, if we do it well, long-term effects for everybody on our campuses.
Thank you, Jean, for saying that. I completely agree. The cultural and social difference classes that students have to take in the integrations curriculum are absolutely a result of student protests and demands. Students asked for those kinds of classes in 1970, in 1993, in 2014, in 2017, and then finally 3 years ago, we started to see them. So thank you, Jean. Yeah, Grace.
Is it okay if I just ask my question?
Yeah.
So I, obviously now we have, like you said, the Multicultural Center at St. Ben's, but I think, at least I'll speak for myself, and I think a lot of other people would agree that there's like different environments at St. Ben's and St. John's, and I'm just curious if you know if there's any sort of process or something happening to get something like the Multicultural Center at St. John's as well.
I don't know of any current efforts. I know that when the Multicultural Center was discussed, the initial idea, and students were pressing for it, was to have it at St. John's, and then there was a question of space, and so I know that that was in the past, something students asked for. I'm not sure if there are current plans to have a similar space at St. John's. Thank you, Grace.
Hello, my name is Adrian Bilal. I'm the Cultural Affairs Board Chair in the Multicultural Center. I had a question. So on one of your slides, you talked about sort of the reluctancy for white students to show up to events held by the Black organizations. I feel like even now that still occurs. Mm-hmm. What would you say is like, or I guess what would you propose is a way that we can kind of move forward from that and attract more white students to come to multicultural events, especially Johnny's, to be willing to like go out and seek that information?
That's a great question and a hard question. I don't really know how to get people to come to events. I mean, one way is to require attendance. Outside of requiring them, it really is voluntary, right? Promoting it, saying this is really open to everyone. But outside of making it a requirement, I don't know really how to get people or force them to come or even entice them to come. But I agree, it's definitely still a problem that that many white students don't come to events that are organized by non-white students. Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, thanks again, Brittany. Can we just get one more round of applause for her? So for the second part of our event, we thought that it would be an opportunity to showcase kind of a more contemporary history. And because we didn't really have, that archival material to necessarily tell it, Aubrey Sherman, one of my coworkers at the JDI, came up with a great idea to show a short episode of a show called Grownish. And so the episode that we're going to review kind of tracks the lives of fictional college students from a liberal arts college in California in the response or aftermath of the murder of an unarmed black man by police. I can say that there's no presence of violence in this show, but the themes are a little bit heavy, and it just kind of follows like how these characters in their own lives and where they are at in their own development and understanding of racial issues kind of confronted this. So that's a little bit about the show. It's about 20 minutes, and then to conclude our event, we'll have the opportunity to hear from the new Senior Diversity Officer, who Aubrey will introduce later.
Good night, everybody. So for those of you who don't know me, my name's Aubrey. I'm the diversity coordinator for the Johnny Development Institute, and I'm kind of just going to go over a few of the points that we saw in the episode. So really, the episode focused on three main things, in my opinion: acceptance, racism, and internal bias, right? We all want to make sure that everyone, no matter who you are, where you're from, is accepted. Racism, it's something that's obviously prevalent in today's society, and like Dr. Brittany Merritt Nash said, it's something that's even more prevalent on college campuses. So we always want to be aware of that and aware of our surroundings and our situations. And then inherent bias. Everyone has a different way through which they view the world. Whether you come from Minnesota, you're from Los Angeles, you're from the Bahamas, everyone has different experiences from different parts of the world. So understanding where your biases lie and where your understanding of certain things lie, that's really the main key in, just getting out there and being able to approach these situations with the best foot possible. I want to bring reference back to the 2020 call to action. Some of us might not know it. I know that currently I'm working with the St. John Senate in order to change it, and probably hopes to bring a more fruitful and updated version to it. I ask you to remember, what is your call to action? What is your change that you're going to bring about? Let's not even think in the context of Black History Month for 2023. Let's think broadly. What's your call to action? What are you going to be doing to make your difference in the world? This month, for Black History Month, the Johnny Development Institute has decided to make the theme past, present, future, focusing on Black history. And to that, I have a quote from an anonymous source. It reads, "Past is experience, present is experiment, and future is expectation. Use your experience in your experiments to achieve your expectations." And with that, I now would like to welcome our new, as of 1 month, I'm told, Senior Diversity Officer, Sandra Mitchell. If you could please just give her a big round of applause, that'd be great.
Wow, good evening. Thank you, Aubrey. I was trying to jot down the things you were saying. I'm like, okay, I'm going to have to hit them again after this to get all of that down. First, thank you, Johnny Development Institute, for inviting me to just say a few words. As Aubrey mentioned, I've been here a month, and so I'm still learning things. I am still trying to figure out the names of buildings on both campuses. So again, I keep telling people, if you see me wandering on campus, would you please just point me in the right direction? Because chances are I'm lost. And that happens a lot. I'm directionally challenged, if you want to call it that. I guess, I don't know what to say after the things that we saw this evening, the history that Dr. Merritt Nash shared. It's kind of hard to put into words how you feel, the emotions that are a part of these types of learnings that we have. And for me, especially as a Black woman, as folks say, it makes you feel some kind of way. So I'm definitely feeling some kind of way. And the things that really stand out to me are the fact that so many of the things that were part of the history of these institutions are still here. Some of the things that folks were fighting for then, we are still fighting for now. And I want us to be very clear that my position, that's progress, but this is only a tiny piece of a long history of work that needs to be done. I love the fact that they talked about in different cases that you all are a part of this history now. And so we often talk about which side of history do you want to be on? When you look back at this institution as an alum, these institutions as an alum? What do you want your mark in that history to be? What do you want to be able to look back on and say, okay, yeah, we did that. We did something. Because students are doing things. I was asked a little bit, well, first of all, I want to get to two of the questions that were raised at the microphone. So one was about the Multicultural Center at St. John's. And so I wanted to respond to that with my limited knowledge, so I could be wrong here. I don't believe that there is any plan in place right now to have a center like that on the St. John's campus because we're really trying to integrate two campuses. And the goal of integration is really just that. It's integration, not symmetry. And so we may not always see things on both campuses, but the goal really is to get people to look at these two campuses as one campus. And so you might see something at St. Ben's that's not at St. John's, and something at St. John's that's not at St. Ben's. So remember, I'm 1 month in, but that is my understanding of it. I think there was also a question about how do we get students, especially our white students, to participate in activities that are put on by our BIPOC students, our minoritized students. You know, that has been a question that I raised even as a student, as an undergraduate student. That's a hard one. I think one of the things, and Dr. Merritt Nash talked a little bit about this, is you can require things. You know, it's kind of difficult, and I hate that you have to say, well, this is going to be mandatory. We're going to make it mandatory that you do the right thing. Just kind of seems out of place, right? But there has to be something to get people in the door. I don't like the idea of a stick, but sometimes that's what's necessary. Maybe it's more of a carrot. Maybe we look at this as, this is a great opportunity. I can tell you from some of my experiences that when we've required students to participate in things, when it's extra credit in a class, we get great attendance. And an example that I love to draw on is at an institution, and we're talking many years ago now, well, about 15 years ago, we started a series of dialogues. And they were called Dialogues on Diversity, and we wanted to have a topic. We had these every month, and we literally had them every month for like 10 years. And the idea was not so much that we want people to walk away as experts, but at least be able to talk about things that we might have different opinions on. And it really started out when we started the dialogues, we had faculty who would say, go to this dialogue for extra credit. And immediately we knew, okay, there are people who are here for extra credit. And we say, you know, if you have a piece of paper for us to sign or something that you need for us to attest to your participation in this dialogue, that's cool, give it to us now. And this is at the beginning of the dialogue. And it was often those students, and we had people raise their hand, you know, are you here because it's required? We would have those students who were there for the extra credit stay after the dialogue still talking. That's what you want. You want people to see that this is something that, yeah, maybe I was dragged to it, but in the end, I learned something and I want to keep learning that. It's not an answer to everything. It's not always going to work, but it is possible. And I think that's what keeps me doing this work is that hope, right? We know these things are possible. How do we keep doing the things that we need to do? How do we do what we need to do to be on that right side of history when history is written, right? So again, I'm kind of babbling because there was so much going on. I had my little notes. I was writing in the dark, so I can't even read them now. But just, I want to leave us with this idea that there is hope. This work is not easy. It's never easy. It's probably not going to be easy. I've been reading today about things like states saying that you can't talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion. You can't talk about ethnic studies, reaching the point that you can't hire for diversity. And so these are things that are being legislated at the state level in many places. It makes it that much harder to do the work. But in the end, we know that it's worth it. We know that that there's gotta be a better way. And so that hope is what I hope that you will leave this evening with, the idea that there is hope. And that by continuing to do the work, by continuing to stand up and be those voices when those voices are necessary, by bringing your friends to things, and most of all, by learning about things as Zoe did. She was reading Robin DiAngelo's book on white fragility, for example. Learning those things is helpful. That helps you to build that hope. When you hear people talking about things in the press, question it, no matter what side it is. When there's a term that comes up that you don't get, don't go to a news source that we know is going to be biased, or not even a news source, because I've discovered that my Facebook friends don't know as much as I thought they did. And so, again, being critical, that's part of your college education, is to be critical about the things that you hear and the things that you learn, but to make sure that you are learning it. That's your responsibility. And I feel like that, combined with hope, is really what we need the most right now, more than anything else. So I'm going to stop babbling. Were we doing Q&A? Yes. If not, that's okay too. My office, I have an office on both campuses. So here I'm in the quad. I'm in the president's suite at both campuses. So I'm in the quad here. I'm in Mary Commons at St. Ben. So I maintain an open door policy that my door is always open. And I am just excited to be part of this community and being a part of, well, now your community, our community. And I just feel like there's so much we can do. So let's make that happen. Okay. All right. Thank you.
All right, one last time, everybody. One big round of applause for Dr. Merritt Nash, the new Senior Diversity Officer, Sandra Mitchell, and of course, Owen, our tech in the back. We appreciate you all coming out, and have a great night.